At 7:13 on a cold Tuesday morning, Daniel opened his bank account and stared at the screen. 42 cents, that was all he had left. His paycheck had arrived only 4 days earlier. He had worked overtime. His wife Emily had picked up extra shifts, and they had stopped buying almost everything they didn't absolutely need. Yet somehow the money was gone again. Daniel slowly locked his phone and placed it face down on the kitchen table. Across from him, Emily was quietly counting bills. Neither of them said a word. Then came 3 soft knocks at their front door. When Daniel opened it, an elderly woman from next door was standing there. Her name was Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. She was nearly 80 years old, always dressed neatly, always calm, and somehow always seemed to have everything under control. She looked past Daniel into the house, then looked directly toward the dark corner behind his living room bookshelf. Suddenly her expression changed. "Daniel," she whispered, "how long has that corner been like that?" Daniel frowned. "What corner?" She pointed. "That one." Daniel turned around. It was the most forgotten part of their home. A narrow corner filled with unopened boxes, an old broken lamp, expired paperwork, dusty shoes, a dead plant, and things they had promised themselves they would organize someday. Mrs. Hayes stared at it for several seconds before saying, "Sometimes money doesn't disappear because you don't earn enough. Sometimes your life simply has nowhere peaceful for it to stay." Daniel laughed nervously. He thought she was talking about FengShui. He thought it was just an old woman's superstition. He had no idea that cleaning that forgotten corner would become the beginning of the biggest change his family had ever experienced. Daniel Carter was 38 years old and had spent most of his adult life believing that hard work solved everything. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a large apartment complex outside Chicago. It wasn't glamorous. He fixed broken pipes, repaired heating systems, unclogged drains, replaced damaged locks, and sometimes worked 12-hour shifts when something went wrong. But Daniel never complained. He had been raised by parents who believed that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and took care of your family, life would eventually reward you. So Daniel worked and worked and worked. His wife Emily worked too. They had 2 children, Noah, 11, and Lily, 8. From the outside, they looked like an ordinary American family. They had a modest house, 2 cars, a small backyard, a kitchen filled with children's drawings, and family photographs on the walls. Everything seemed normal. But behind the front door was a problem nobody could see. Money never stayed. Whenever Daniel received a raise, something happened. The car needed repairs. The refrigerator stopped working. The roof developed a leak. A medical bill arrived. The children's school needed money. The electric bill increased. There was always something. Daniel began to feel as if his bank account had a hole in the bottom. Money came in. Money disappeared. Money came in. Money disappeared. One night after putting the children to bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Emily. She had a calculator in front of her. "How much do we have until Friday?" Daniel asked. Emily hesitated. "About $70. Daniel leaned back. "70? She nodded. "Your check came in last Friday." "I know." Silence filled the kitchen. Emily looked exhausted. "We're doing everything we can," she said. "I know." "Then why does it feel like we're always behind?" Daniel didn't have an answer. That question stayed with him long after they went to bed. The next morning, Daniel was standing outside his house when Mrs. Hayes walked over. She lived 3 houses away. Her little white house was completely different from Daniel's. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't large, but it was always clean. The windows were bright, flowers grew along the walkway. Nothing was broken, and nothing seemed abandoned. Daniel had noticed something strange about Mrs. Hayes over the years. She never seemed rushed. She never seemed desperate. And strangely, she rarely talked about money. One summer, Daniel had mentioned that he was worried about his mortgage. Mrs. Hayes had simply smiled and said, "Money needs a place to rest too." Daniel had laughed. He thought it was just something an old woman said. Now, standing beside his driveway, he remembered those words. Mrs. Hayes pointed toward his house. "Can I come inside for a moment?" "Sure." She followed him into the living room. Her eyes moved slowly around the room. She noticed the clean sofa, the family photographs, the children's toys, and the books. Then her eyes stopped at the forgotten corner. She walked toward it. Daniel followed. "What's wrong with this corner?" he asked. Mrs. Hayes didn't answer immediately. She bent down and lifted an old cardboard box. Inside were unopened envelopes, old receipts, broken electronics, and random objects. She looked at Daniel. "Do you use any of this?" "No." Do you even remember what's inside? No, she smiled sadly. Then why are you keeping it? Daniel shrugged. Maybe I'll need it someday. Mrs. Hayes gently put the box back. That's what people say when they're afraid to let go. Daniel looked at her. She continued, a house remembers what you keep putting into it. Daniel smiled. Mrs. Hayes, are you telling me my house remembers? Not like a person, she said. But your surroundings influence your mind. And your mind influences your choices. That sounded different. Less like superstition, more like common sense. She pointed toward the corner. You have created a place where unfinished things go. Daniel looked around. There were old boxes, broken objects, unpaid bills, unused furniture. Things waiting to be repaired. Things waiting to be decided. Things waiting to be thrown away. And things waiting for someday. Mrs. Hayes looked at him. And every time you walk past that corner, your mind receives the same message. What message? She looked directly at him and said, there is still something wrong. Daniel became quiet. That afternoon, Daniel came home early. For the first time in years, he stood in front of the forgotten corner and really looked at it. He saw things he had stopped noticing. A broken lamp, an old printer, 3 pairs of shoes nobody wore, a stack of magazines, a cracked picture frame, a dead plant, old bills, a box of cables, 2 empty containers, and a chair nobody used. Underneath everything was dust. Daniel suddenly felt embarrassed. This wasn't storage, it was avoidance. He had been putting everything there that he didn't want to deal with. And somehow the corner had become a physical version of his life. He walked into the kitchen and called Emily. Can you come home a little early? Why? I want to clean the living room. Emily laughed. That's what you called me for? Yes. There was a pause. Are you feeling okay? Daniel laughed. I think so. That evening, the entire family worked together. Noah carried boxes. Lily sorted toys. Emily went through paperwork. Daniel repaired what could be repaired and threw away what couldn't. For 3 hours, the house was chaos. But something strange happened. Nobody argued. Nobody complained. The children laughed. Emily played music. Daniel found an old photograph of himself and Emily from their first year of marriage. They had been standing beside a cheap apartment. Both were smiling. They had almost nothing, but they looked happy. Emily held the photograph. I remember this. Daniel smiled. We thought we were rich. Emily looked at him and whispered, we felt rich. They looked at each other. Then Emily said, maybe we forgot how. The next morning, Daniel went to Mrs. Hayes's house. He wanted to thank her. She invited him inside. Her home smelled like fresh coffee. Everything was simple. A small wooden table, a few plants, family photographs, a bookshelf. Nothing unnecessary. Daniel noticed there was almost no clutter. How do you do it? He asked. Mrs. Hayes smiled. Do what? Keep everything so peaceful. She poured coffee. I learned a long time ago that your home should not carry what your heart is afraid to carry. Daniel thought about that. Then he asked, do you really believe in FengShui? Mrs. Hayes smiled. I believe in paying attention. To what? To what your surroundings are telling you. She walked toward a small cabinet. Inside was a little red envelope. She took it out. What is that? Daniel asked. My wealth reminder. Daniel smiled. A wealth reminder? She nodded. Inside the envelope was a single dollar bill. Nothing special, just $1. Mrs. Hayes placed it on the table. This isn't magic, she said. Then what is it? Daniel asked. A symbol. A symbol of what? Enough. Daniel looked confused. She continued. When my husband died, I was terrified. I had bills, a house, and very little savings. I spent months thinking about everything I didn't have. One day I found this dollar in an old drawer. I decided that instead of constantly thinking about what was missing, I would create a place that reminded me to respect what I already had. Daniel stared at the envelope. Did it make you rich? Mrs. Hayes laughed. No. Then she looked directly into his eyes. But it changed the way I behaved with money. Mrs. Hayes gave Daniel 3 rules. First, she said, never place your wealth symbol in a dirty or chaotic space. Daniel nodded. Second, never use it as an excuse to stop working. He nodded again. And third, she smiled. Every time you see it, ask yourself one question. What question? What can I do today to make my financial life stronger? Daniel thought about it. That doesn't sound like feng shui. Perhaps not, she said. But the best traditions usually teach you to act. She explained that in traditional feng shui storytelling, Certain areas of a home are treated as symbolic spaces for stability, abundance, and flow. But the object itself was never the whole story. The environment mattered. The habits mattered. The mindset mattered. And most importantly, action mattered. Daniel understood. The forgotten corner wasn't going to magically produce money, but changing it could change him. And changing him could change the decisions he made every day. That weekend, Daniel and Emily created their own wealth corner. They didn't buy expensive decorations. They didn't spend money on special objects. Instead, they used what they already had. They cleaned the corner completely. They painted the wall. They repaired the lamp. They placed a small, healthy green plant there. Emily added a simple wooden tray. Daniel placed the dollar bill from Mrs. Hayes inside a small red envelope. Then they put a notebook beside it. On the first page, Daniel wrote, "Our money goals: pay off the credit card, build an emergency fund, stop unnecessary spending, save every month, never spend money just because we're stressed." They stood there looking at the list. No magic happened. No money appeared. The lights didn't flash. Nothing changed. But Daniel felt something. For the first time in years, his financial problems were no longer an invisible cloud floating above his head. They were written down, visible, manageable. Emily touched his shoulder. "What do you think?" Daniel smiled. "I think we finally have a plan." 3 days later, Daniel's car made a strange noise. He pulled into a repair shop. The mechanic looked under the hood. "Your alternator is going." Daniel's stomach dropped. "How much?" "About $800. $800. The old Daniel would have panicked. He would have used the credit card. Then he would have spent the next 6 months paying interest. Instead, he went home. He stood in front of the wealth corner. He looked at the dollar. Then he opened the notebook. He and Emily went through their expenses. They canceled 2 subscriptions, sold an unused television, returned something they had bought but didn't need. And Daniel picked up 2 weekend repair jobs. Emily worked 1 additional shift. Within 3 weeks, they had the money. They paid for the repair. No credit card, no new debt. Something had changed. The corner hadn't paid the bill they had, but the corner had reminded them to act differently. Over the next several months, the Carter family became different. Not rich, not suddenly wealthy, just more intentional. Noah started saving part of his allowance. Lily decorated a little jar labeled Future Dreams. Emily started preparing weekly meals instead of ordering food when everyone was tired. Daniel began checking their budget every Sunday, and the family stopped treating money as something they were afraid to talk about. One night, Noah asked, "Dad, are we poor?" Daniel looked at his son. "No, but we don't have as much money as some people. That doesn't mean we're poor. What does being rich mean?" Daniel looked toward the corner. Then he smiled. "Being rich means knowing what matters to you and having enough discipline to protect it." Noah thought about that. Then he put $5 into his savings jar. 6 months after cleaning the forgotten corner, Daniel received an unexpected phone call. His apartment complex was changing management. The new company needed someone to supervise maintenance across 3 buildings. The position paid significantly more. Daniel almost turned it down. He didn't think he was qualified. Then he remembered something Mrs. Hayes had told him. A clean space cannot create an opportunity, but a clear mind can recognize one. Daniel applied. He got the interview, then another, then the job. His salary increased by nearly 20%. Emily cried when he told her. Not because they were suddenly rich, but because for the first time they had room to breathe. They could save, they could prepare, they could plan. And perhaps most importantly, they no longer felt like every unexpected expense was a disaster. One evening, Daniel visited Mrs. Hayes. He told her everything: the new job, the savings, the repaired car, the family budget, and the children saving money. She listened quietly. Then she smiled. "So," she asked, "did the dollar make you wealthy?" Daniel laughed. "No." "Did the plant?" "No." "The red envelope?" "No." "The corner?" Daniel paused. "No." Mrs. Hayes nodded. "Good." Daniel looked confused. "Good?" "Yes." "Then what changed?" Mrs. Hayes looked toward her window. "Everything around you was already there. The dollar was already there. The plant could have been anywhere." The notebook was just paper. She smiled. "You changed because you finally created a place where you could think clearly." Daniel understood. The forgotten corner hadn't been a magical gateway to wealth. It had been a mirror. It showed him what he had been doing with the rest of his life. Ignoring problems, keeping unnecessary things, delaying decisions, spending emotionally, waiting for someday. When he cleaned the corner, he had begun cleaning up those habits too. Years later, Daniel would still remember the morning. He had 4217 in his bank account. He remembered the fear, the exhaustion, the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, he was somehow falling behind. But he remembered something else too. A knock on the door, an old woman, a forgotten corner, and one simple sentence. Sometimes money doesn't disappear because you don't earn enough. Sometimes your life simply has nowhere peaceful for it to stay. The truth was, the corner had never been magic. The dollar had never been magic. The plant had never been magic. The red envelope had never been magic. The real transformation happened when Daniel stopped waiting for his life to change and started changing the space and habits that were within his control. He cleaned what he had ignored. He organized what he had avoided. He tracked what he had never measured. He saved what he used to spend. And he finally learned that wealth isn't always about getting more. Sometimes it begins with respecting what you already have. So tonight, before you go to bed, look around your own home. Find that forgotten corner. Maybe it's behind a bookshelf. Maybe it's inside a closet. Maybe it's a drawer you haven't opened in years. Maybe it's the place where broken things, old papers, unused objects, and unfinished decisions quietly gather. Don't ask yourself, where is my money? Ask yourself, what am I allowing to remain unfinished? Clear the space. Open the curtains. Let in the light. Throw away what no longer serves you. Fix what can be fixed. Organize what matters. And then write down one financial goal, just one. Because sometimes the first step toward a better financial life isn't finding a secret door. Sometimes it's simply clearing the path. And somewhere in your home, there may be a forgotten corner waiting for you to begin. Not because that corner will magically make you rich, but because changing that corner might finally remind you that you have the power to change the rest of your life.